Let's explore that a little bit for a moment, because you do talk about in your framework about leaders having the ability to admit their mistakes. There are some that would say that a leader admitting mistakes is a sign of weakness. What's your reflection on that?
Well, if you think it's a sign of weakness, then your model for a leader is somebody that has all of the answers and that is above reproach and is perfect, or is disingenuous because when they're not perfect, they can't admit that they're not perfect. So there's challenges, I think, with the view that when leaders admit that they were wrong, somehow that weakens them. Because I think, so you look at the other part of it, I just know personally that when a leader has admitted that they screwed something up, now I can relate to that person because I screw up a lot and you're just, now we have something in common. And thank you so much for taking responsibility. There's a big chunk in that too. And to not walk past the truth, but the truth becomes more important than your ego. And so there's an awful lot there. I can speak more to the benefits of it than I can maybe to a leader, maybe Patton or somebody like that, an award that they just got to get things done. Yeah. Fine, you don't have time for that. Maybe you just got to be seen as decisive and powerful. But I think in the corporate world, not being able to admit that you screwed something up is much more of a long-term weakness.
Yeah. And without doubt, by the way, I fully agree with you. And it was a provocative question on purpose. And even in the military, I would say if you can't admit your mistakes, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you'll make the same mistakes over and over again. Definition of insanity is to do the same things over and over again and expect a different result. So you do need to have that humility to admit your mistakes. And it's actually a sign of strength. And it also builds trust. I like what you said about relatability too, Brett. It builds relatability and it builds trust. I don't know how we've gotten on this train here today, but we're on John C. Maxwell's train today for whatever reason.
I love John Maxwell.
Well, another one from him on this one about when challenged with a similar question about isn't admitting your, in this case it was shortcomings, but isn't admitting your shortcomings a sign of weakness? The simple answer was that assumes that they don't already know.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're not able to admit your mistakes or admit your shortcomings, first of all, it doesn't show humility. Secondly, it doesn't build trust. And there's a very good chance that the team already know what you're good at and what you're not good at. So why hide it? Right?
And plus, I would guess that you've had this experience, Mick, where if you have somebody that you lead that isn't able to admit their mistake, one, often it's hard to find the mistake. So it takes a huge investigation. And then when you find it and they can't admit that they made a mistake, one, you wonder if you can trust them. Two, you are concerned about their ability in the future and their ability to work as an effective teammate. So when you put the shoe on the other foot as a leader, I bet there's very few leaders that would have much patience with somebody that they lead that isn't able to take responsibility for a mistake.
Yeah, 1000%. Right. Another one that you have in your framework is about feedback. And interestingly, when you gave your example before, when you were talking about essentially the team gathering around and working on improvement, you brought up the example of someone not being very good at challenging conversations. Tell me more about your thoughts about feedback and why it's important.
Yeah, so I think if I had to choose a skill that a leader absolutely has to be expert in, it's in giving feedback. And by the way, in receiving feedback. So let's do the quick one first. Receiving feedback. As a leader, if somebody has the gumption, the courage to give you feedback, somebody that you lead, this is a gift. This is an amazing gift that you can throw in the garbage by being defensive or by explaining it away. And basically those things say, well, you're wrong. And that breaks down psychological safety as quickly as anything. So as a leader, we got to recognize that it takes courage to give somebody an authority feedback. And if somebody is giving you that, they have overcome their courage and their discomfort, and they care about you enough to give you this feedback. And so what I promote is your job is to receive the feedback, period. Ask open-ended questions. Ask, maybe what would they have done? Be very curious, really try and understand it, do reflective listening. Let me make sure I got straight what you're saying, but do not justify, do not deny, do not explain. Now, if there are things that they clearly didn't know, that is why they give you that feedback, but do that a day later, a week later, circle back and go to them and say, hey, I've been thinking about the feedback you gave me. And I was wondering, did you know of this other circumstance or whatever it is? So you're still able to impart knowledge that informs them of why you did what you did, but you don't do it in that moment. In that moment, you tell them, thank you, it's safe, and please keep helping me grow into a better leader. So that's the receiving feedback. The giving feedback, there is a common model out there that we've used in the past more than recently, called, I forgot what the name of it is, but it's situation, behavior, impact. I'm going to state the situation, what the behavior was, and how it impacted me or others. And it's a very crisp formula that gives direct feedback without, judging you. It just talks about the impact on me. That might be really good for people that are very uncomfortable giving feedback. They need a formula, they need some clarity, or for a peer-to-peer. But as a leader, if I'm giving feedback to somebody, it's rare that it needs to be urgent. If they made a racial slur or something, absolutely. Hey, that's not acceptable. Let's go talk about this. And then it can be a one-way conversation. But I'm going to digress just a little bit. I went into this a new commitment as a leader with a new leadership team, and the leadership team was very responsible, very capable, very knowledgeable. They were a really good team of leaders. And then when I met with the operators, what I found was a lot of frustration, a lot of feeling disempowered, a lot of feeling like they were micromanaged. And I was trying to understand what was going on. So I met with the leaders and I said, hey, let's talk about the environment in there and how do you give feedback? And so we had this conversation and I started to talk about, well, how about if we have a conversation when we give feedback? And one of the leaders said, well, Brett, if somebody walks in 5 minutes late to the clean room to do manufacturing, I need to tell them right then, hey, you're 5 minutes late. That's not okay. We're going to potentially miss build plan because you're late. And I said, well, what happens if they were late because a coworker was in the hall crying and they were attending to their needs? Or an engineer grabbed them and they walked in late because of that. As a leader, you're an authority and you just from 30,000 feet dropped a feedback bomb and then walked away. And what you just told them is, I don't really care what your side of the story is. I don't care your perspective. What about, hey, I noticed you were 5 minutes late. Is everything okay? And just the question, you can state the situation, the facts of the situation, but then following it up with a question allows them to provide their experience. It allows them to take responsibility. If they were late because they were out too late the night before, 95% of the time, they're going to say, I'm sorry, I screwed up. And then you can ask things like, well, how can you stop it from happening again or whatever, and then be done. But they were able to then own it without you dropping it on them. So I believe conversational feedback wherever possible is really important. It in fact, it deepens relationships instead of makes them more shallow and divisive.
I love that term, conversational feedback. Really nice, Brett. I like this concept of starting with the question. There's pretty much only two ways that can go that I can think of instantly. There may be more, but there's two ways that asking that question could go. You, as the leader, either get more situational awareness of what was really going on and you discover something deeper or more important, or
Right.
the person takes ownership and owns it.
Or they could not take ownership too. They could say, yeah, but the traffic was horrible.
Mm.
And then you can then hit them with, well, the impact of this is on your team and on your build. So you can still get to the ownership thing. And my expectation is, but you don't start there.
Yeah, really nice, Brett.
Yeah.
A couple of things I want to unpack and get your feedback on here. We all have blind spots, every single one of us. Some of the key words that Brett used here. Feedback is a gift. It's a gift to help you uncover those blind spots. The second thing that he said, that person, the words are still ringing in my head, Brett. It was so powerful. That person cared enough about you that they overcame their fear to have the courage to give you that feedback. They care enough about you that they overcome their fear to have the courage to give you that feedback. I said that twice on purpose. It's very powerful. So give them the respect of listening with an open mind, without judgment. And maybe ask more questions so that you do ensure that you fully understand what they're trying to tell you. And it may be because, remember, they're trying to overcome some fear here and they're building up courage. The first thing that they might tell you might only be the tip of something else.
Yes.
So by asking that exploratory question, they might say, you know what, boss, while we're at it, they might tell you something even more important. So listen without judgment. Don't defend yourself. Don't react. And maybe even ask some exploratory questions to see if there's anything more behind that tip that they've exposed.
Beautiful.
Now, here's my go. Admit your mistakes, admit your shortcomings. This is something that I struggle with. I'm not good at giving constructive feedback to people. I'm very good at giving positive feedback. I'm not as good at giving constructive feedback. And it's something that I need to work on as a leader, because when I receive feedback, I love it. I fully subscribe to everything you said, Brett, that feedback is a gift. But for something within my brain, just being really open with the entire world that listens to this podcast, when it is my turn to give someone else some constructive feedback, I do struggle with it, right? It can be challenging.
So you are a human. Congratulations. Yes. If somebody said they're totally comfortable giving somebody else feedback, I would probably call them a liar or ask them to start a religion or something. But yeah, one thing that I try to do, well, if I need to give somebody feedback, and this is again what we teach because we're with as a team, we're addressing a team that works together. Use each other. So it's a wonderful opportunity to deepen a relationship. It's a wonderful opportunity to ruin a relationship. So Mick, if I need to say to Joe, I need to give Joe some feedback, and I work with you, I might say, hey Mick, can you be Joe? I'd like to practice giving Joe feedback on this scenario. And I want you to be a grumpy Joe, and then I want you to be a receptive Joe, because this conversation is really important. It needs to go well. That's one kind of resource. Two, I try and think about what are our shared objectives that unites us, that I can utilize, I can point to, and also talk about, Joe, I really care. I don't like the sandwich, the compliment, negative, and then compliment or whatever, but I do think it's important to say, to humanize it and get the full range. So I really care about your success. And I really, I don't know what was going on, but here's the facts of the situation. What is your perspective on it? What do you think are the positives of that? What do you think are the negatives? What could be a better way, or whatever? But talk through it with the ultimate goal being that Joe is a fantastic employee. That's why I'm giving him feedback. And I think that if people are smart, you can't fool anybody. They'll catch on. But if you go into that with the mindset, not that Joe is a slacker or Joe is flawed, but with the mindset of Joe has a lot to contribute and I want to help him be successful, then that'll come out when you give the feedback.
You used a similar word again and a similar phrasing, Brett. You care enough about Joe and Joe's success that you want to give him this feedback. So care is at the root of feedback. Really love this.
Yeah.
Right, one more exploratory path I'd like to go down. You have mentioned quite earlier in the interview that you don't fully buy into competency-based approaches or 9-box assessments or other kind of instruments that people use to measure leadership attributes and the like. Tell me more about your thoughts there.
Well, detailed statistical research will say that we are not good assessors of each other. That data, if I assess you, the data from my assessment reflects more about me than it does about you. That the data is not reliable and it is not valid. So it kills me that research says this, and yet we're not paying attention to it. Now, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it is important to have some way to assess, to consider somebody's attributes. But so there's this model of 18 that one part of our organization is using, 18 competencies. Where do you start with that? So I have to be skilled in 18 different areas, and you're going to find some areas that I'm not skilled at. And so if I then improve my skills on those 3 areas, does having 18 competencies make me a good leader? No, it might. In fact, it might make you more. Number one, it's developing a weakness, which there's a lot of data that says when you utilize strengths, it's much more, the business outcomes are much greater than fixing weaknesses. And what the heart of the question becomes, what makes a good leader? And I will give a plug to Buckingham and Goodall. One of my favorite books is 9 Lies About Work. Talk about somebody that challenges the status quo. He says, he talks statistically first, we're not good assessors of others, but we are good assessors of our own experience. That data is reliable and valid. So how do we assess leadership? We should assess it by followership. If there are people that will follow you, if your team will follow you and you ask them questions about their own experience with you, and you determine that there's strong followership, you're a fantastic leader then. I don't care about the competencies. Leadership by definition is if you have followers. That creates the leader. And the founder of W.L. Gore and Associates was way before his time. He started our company in 1958, and he said, one of our core principles is leaders defined by followership. So that's where I would say, okay, we need to drive strong followership in our leaders. We need to measure strength of followership, and that should be the core assessment of their leadership. But we also need to, from a development standpoint, identify areas where they could grow and improve. I think 18 competencies is way too many. I would go for more like 5. Buckingham, I think, says 3 to 5, but I would go with 5 or 6. In our humble approach, we have 6, and there's 6 for Gore because they reflect Gore's values. In another company, you might have a different 6. They should be aligned with your values, but they're very broad. So 1 is technical competency. Okay, that could be 10 competencies buried underneath the headline technical. 1 is soft skills. Again, that's a huge group, but it's just a broad kind of way to go, okay, is there technical pieces that stop them from being effective that we need to support their growth in? Is there soft skill pieces? So these are broad categories. They're not traditional competency models, but they do enable a conversation for how can we help this leader grow their capability.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Really good, Brett, and you articulated it very well. And I love that the process that you just took us through to explain your thinking. One thing I'd like to say there is that, for the avoidance of doubt, followers is not the amount of people that follow you on Instagram or Facebook. We're talking about the people that you inspire into action. If you can inspire them into action, that's wonderful. What I really did like what you said about Brett was the alignment to values, because that's going to speak volumes about the culture of the organization and making sure that the leaders are living those values. So I definitely see the value in that, for sure. Using the word value far too often there, but we definitely see the value of that. That might be a good segue to ask you this question. Why your upcoming book, why is it called Leaders with a capital L?
Because leader is a common title now, but I don't think having that title makes you a leader. And to me, a capital L leader, we've already talked about some things like they admit mistakes. They speak last. They don't need to have the idea. They want their team to be engaged. They don't want to bias their team by speaking first. They're good at giving and receiving feedback. And probably one of the toughest things is they have courage to speak truth to power. And this is a tough one. And this is where I think you earn the capital L, because often there might be decisions that are made, quote unquote, above you, that is making your life more difficult or your team's life more difficult. And how in the world would the person that made that decision be able to make a good decision if they don't have the full picture? And so leaders need to have the courage to go to people of authority, even if it's your CEO, and say, you know what, this decision was made, or I know you're considering this, and I think one of my roles is to make sure that we make the best possible decisions. And part of that for me is to make you aware of maybe things you might not be aware that factor into the decision, or whatever the approach is. I think a capital L leader also has that courage piece.
Yeah, really nice, Brett. Really looking forward to reading it when it comes out. I love the fact that the word courage has come up. Wasn't counting, but it's come up at least a dozen times in our discussion today.
Oh,
So that tells us something as well. But what a wonderful discussion, Brett. I've really enjoyed it today. I personally learnt a lot. So thank you very much for everything that you've shared.
can I make one additional
Of course.
point to make? I'm sorry. I think this is a really key piece. You know, we diversity, equity, and inclusion has become a really important topic that companies are driving. We should have been driving it years ago, but now we're waking up to it. The challenge is how do you create more diversity? So you have a leadership team that is a bunch of white men. How do you create diversity? You fire a bunch of people and hire in a more diverse group? One of the things that the humble approach to leadership, the humble leadership development, does is when you've identified those developees, I call them, and you've got a group of people that you're supporting their growth and development of. Now you can go, okay, how diverse is that group of developees? And we did this about 5 years ago in a team that I was leading, and we had I think it was something like 19 developees that we've identified. We've either identified them as leaders or they've self-identified. And 3 of them were people of color. And our current leadership team was something like 18 and 2, with 2 people of color. So what we did is we said, okay, who else do we think on the manufacturing floor has the capacity, the capability to be a really good leader that don't look like us? And so we went out proactively and tapped people on the shoulder and said, hey, Gerald, have you ever considered leadership? And as a matter of fact, we have a big Native American community here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and a huge portion of our manufacturing population are Native Americans. And a lot of that community, part of their culture is humility. And so they don't think of themselves naturally as leaders. And so the tapping on the shoulder, probably the first time that they even considered that question. So at that time, we identified 6 people that were willing to say, yeah, I'd be interested in it. And so we started putting time and effort into supporting their development. It only took 2 years, Mick, and 4 of those 6 became, well, 4 of the 6 became leaders, and 2 of them now are the next level of leader. And so this is a really tangible way to drive diversity in your leadership, is by driving diversity in your developees. Because now you got choices. You're not just choosing a bunch of who's the next white man we're going to have lead. You got a diverse group that are available.
Some really interesting things there, Brett, and I want to unpack it just a little bit before we draw to our conclusion. What I loved about your story is cultural awareness. So the fact that the Native American group did not see themselves as leaders, they did not feel like it was their position to stick up their hand and say, I would like to be a leader, but when invited to do so, they were interested. So there's a lot of cultural understanding that went into that. That cultural understanding could just be a perception too. In this case, it's a cultural understanding. In other cases, you might have a diverse workforce at the shop floor level, but when they look up and they see the executive, etc., they may not feel that their raising of the hand is welcome. So you need to provide that environment where it does feel welcome. And then we might be able to start getting a snowball effect. And we might be able to start, I'm going to borrow some words from Dr. Alessandra Wall here, previous podcast guest. Then you can start, and listen carefully to the words, you can start to retain and attract a diverse workforce.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you the context of why that came up, Brett. I asked Alessandra the question about how do we attract and retain? And she immediately reversed it and said, you will never attract and retain until you retain and attract. And how you're going to retain is by giving people opportunities and to show them that they belong, creating that inclusive environment where they see that there's a place for them. There's a place for them at the executive, in the senior leadership, giving them the understanding that what they do matters and that we're creating a positive impact, that the work that they do is valued, and staying true to your values and beliefs. D&I is, once we're coming back to plaque problems again, aren't we? D&I is not something that you put on your mission statement or on your corporate goals and say, job done. No, it takes the positive action that Brett is talking about. Then you're going to start retaining talent. And when you retain talent, that's going to attract new talent.
And it'll attract new diverse leaders, because now I see a leader that looks like me. Maybe I could do that too. So that's beautiful.
Spot on. Okay, that brings us to our quickfire round, Brett. So last 4 questions. And you've already shared a couple of books along the way. You can share one of those again, or you can pick a new one. What is your favorite book?
Well, I'll pick a new one. So I have 3, 9 Lies About Work, good to great. But I also like just these simple life lessons that's in the 4 agreements. The 4 agreements are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. No.
Again, this is like the Toltec culture, ancient culture, I think is in Central America. The 4 agreements are: being impeccable with your word, words matter. And so even when you're like in a back room being sloppy with your words, that says something about you. So impeccable with your words. Don't make assumptions. If you're starting to make assumptions, ask questions, seek understanding. Don't take anything personally. This is kind of a theme that we've talked about too, where taking things personally is a barrier to growth and learning. And what this book says is, what other people say about you is much more about them than it is about you. And then always do your best. So those are 4 pretty sound principles to live by. So
I love it. I'm going to have to check that one out. That one's new to me, but everything you said resonated so strongly. What's your favorite quote?
So I'll throw one really quickly out there. Wisdom is the realization of the vastness of your ignorance. I love that. That helps keep me humble. But the most profound one that I like is Oliver Wendell Holmes, I think, said, for the simplicity on this side of complexity, I wouldn't give you a fig. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, for that, I would give you anything I have. And I can just share what it means to me is that it's very easy to do right and wrong and think dualistically, good, bad, right, wrong, black, white. The world is much more complex than that. And so as you work through the complexity and try and look at a right, wrong issue, and you think about it more deeply, on the other side, you get to other simple things, like it's about love, it's about understanding, it's about being kind, it's about caring and those things. And so, and that's the simplicity that you need to get through the complexity to really appreciate how simple life can actually be. So I love that quote.
I'm not sure if you notice or not. So I'm going to make you aware. You just did that. You just took something very complex, a very complex statement, and made it simple for us. I love it. Yeah, you embodied the quote as you described it to us. So it was wonderful. Yeah, really good.
Oh, thank you.
Now, what's one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I wish I knew the destructiveness of judgment. An early relationship I had said, "Gosh, you and your family sure judge people." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? We're just talking about situations." And that was my first inkling, but I didn't pay that much heed to it. And now the further I've gone, I've realized that judgment just stands in the way of progress, that no one deserves judgment. You can talk about behaviors, you can talk about negative and positive consequences of behaviors, but judging people, and moreover judging yourself, is just not the way to live, and is just a barrier to your own personal growth.
Wow. You know, I've actually lost count how many episodes we're into this podcast. And that's my favorite answer to that question. We've asked that question to every guest. Wow. Really nice, Brett. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And finally, I'm sure that there's going to be lots of people in our audience that are eager to hear when Leaders with a capital L is going to be released, maybe eager to learn more about your framework and all of the things that you're doing to really flip this thing to more about team coaching and team development more than just one-on-one development. How do people get in contact with you, Brett?
My website is synapticleader.com. So that's the best way. Also, I'm still in the process, and maybe by the time this podcast airs, I will have a YouTube channel. I'm on LinkedIn, Brett Larson, in Flagstaff, Arizona. You can find me there. And I really love anybody to reach out and have. This is the most fun I've had in a long time, Mick. Thank you. I just love this whole topic and this conversation. So yeah, those are a couple of ways. And just a little story. As you probably know, it's really a lot of the names have been taken, business names, especially around leadership. And I was listening to Joe Dispenza. I'm not sure if you've heard that name, but he talks about the ability for anybody of any age. Your brain is neuroplastic, and you can change. You can develop new synapses. You can develop new beliefs and new habits. We all have that capability. And so I thought, gosh, what I want is leaders to be aware and to be able to learn and grow and change. Synaptic Leader seems like a good name to me.
Yeah, nice.
So
I love the way you got there with that. And I've got to echo back to you. This has been a wonderful interview. So great having you on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I personally learned a lot from it, and I know that our audience will as well. So thank you so much, Brett. And we wish you the best of luck with the upcoming book launch, and we'll be championing and cheering in your corner for your message to get out to as many people as possible.
And I'll be cheering for you as well. Thank you so much for the honor of participating in your podcast, Meg.
Great. Thank you, Brett. Stay safe.